Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. As always, just bear with me while I get things set up. But we are finally back with a new episode. I feel like I should be playing hold music or something. Really, what I need is an intro again. And to figure out how to set one. Okay, copy. Post. Again, just bear with me. Just sharing. Share the page. And one more share, and then we're good to go. And why is it not showing? Hold on. Okay, so that is working. It's just not. Okay, apparently I have audio, but not visual, and I don't know why not. I should have visual. Try that, see if it does any good. Again, bear with me. I'm just trying to figure out. It's kind of nice, and I don't understand why it's not working. Okay, at any rate, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Paranormal Encyclopedia. It's been... Oh, there we go, and now I have visual again. Excellent, things are working. But welcome back to Paranormal Encyclopedia. I know it's been quite a while. I hadn't meant it to be. Things have been a little bit crazy in my personal life. We had to move to a new apartment and getting settled in there, and getting all of that situated and things going on with work have just made it impossible to get on. Wow, 3 months since the last episode. That's terrible. But we're back. It is my intention to start going back to doing at least weekly shows. I'm actually considering trying to do more than one a week now. Because here's the thing. I had a discussion with a good friend of mine who made a very good suggestion because of the fact, obviously, I want to increase my numbers of subscribers so I can finally reach 1,000 and have some chance at getting to monetize the channel again. And I was talking to some friends about this, and one of them pointed out that in the research she had done, trying to help somebody else with their channel, the fewer subscribers you have, the shorter your video should be. And I think there's some sense to that. I mean, my catalog of videos is mostly an hour long, and looking at viewer times, a lot. I mean, I have some very loyal subscribers, and I love and appreciate you guys. But people coming in aren't watching the entire video, which isn't doing me a whole lot of good. So going forward, I'm shooting to try to do at least one or two 10, 20-minute videos a week, and then ideally an hour-long video as well, because I like the long format. So I don't want to stop doing longer videos. I just want to start adding more shorter videos. And a lot of the shorter videos are going to be revisiting old topics like who I am, what demonology is, etc., and maybe taking single ideas in there and expanding on them a little over the course of multiple videos. but it's to help people get into the channel who are new and don't want to sit through an entire hour-long video just to figure out who I am and why they should listen to me over somebody else, since I'm hardly the only paranormal YouTube channel. There are other things I'm working on. I'm working on new guests. I've got a new one lined up that should be good to go, probably from what I'm hearing, closer to the end of the month. They have a publication coming out. They're shooting for a Halloween release date, and for want to do it closer to Halloween to help them promote what they're doing for obvious reasons. But we'll have more about that as we get closer to that release date. As I get more information from them. So there's something else I've been working on as well, which is a very big project and is one of the main things I want to talk about tonight. So back in July now, it's hard to believe that given it's the 1st of October, my fiance and I, for my 45th birthday, went up to Salem. We visited, that's actually where the conversation about the shorter videos happened, but we visited a good friend of ours there, and we went to Salem itself, and it got me thinking. I've always been fascinated by the Salem witch trials. So much weirdness, both in general and particularly for witch trials, happened in Salem. And the one day I wasn't feeling very well. I was having some issues with my knees, and I said to my fiance, because I decided not to go with them when they went back. We went to Salem one day, and then they went again, and I decided not to go. But I said to my fiance, "Find me a good book on the trials." That's what you could, you go find a good book for me. And she found a very good book called The Storm of Witchcraft. And rereading about the trials made me realize a couple of things. One is, as far as I know, no ghost hunter or paranormal investigator like myself has ever really done an examination of the trials. If anyone knows of someone who did, please let me know in the comments or in the chat. If anybody hops in at some point, but nobody with that. The only person I know of with my sort of paranormal mindset who's looked into witch trials is a guy by the name of Montague Summers, who was a priest, although there's a lot of question about that, in the first half of the 20th century, who did one of the first, actually, I correct myself, he did the very first translation of the Malleus Maleficarum, the Hammer of Witches. He also wrote extensively on vampire folklore, werewolf folklore, and all of these kinds of topics. And what made his viewpoint so unusual is where most authors who write about the Salem witch trials or the European witch trials are very much, there's no such thing as witches, this whole thing is utterly ridiculous. Summers takes the standpoint that witches are entirely real. And that they really worship Satan and practice black magic, and that to say anything else is contrary to the Christian faith. Needless to say, I don't agree with him. But the question that's percolating in my mind is, was there a spiritual force involved in the Salem witch trials? I am not proposing that the 25 people who died, for those of you who may not know, 19 people were hanged in Salem. No one was burned at the stake anywhere in the United States. They were hanged. Because I'll get back to this in a second, but basically English law treats witchcraft differently than most of Europe. One person was crushed to death under rocks by the name of Giles Corey because he refused to plead guilty or innocent. And I found out something very interesting about that I'll also be circling back to. And then 5 more people died in prison. What's less well known is that there were a number of witch trials in the United States in the 17th century. They all culminated in the Salem trials that ran from the winter of 1692, mostly January-ish, to 1693. But that was kind of where went, and it got utterly insane. I mean, at the height of the trial, about 200 people were accused of witchcraft, and unlike many European trials, what made the Salem trial so unusual, among other things, was that a man by the name of George Burroughs, who was actually a Puritan minister, who had been Salem's minister before the trials, was accused and executed for witchcraft. That normally didn't happen. But there's always been the question, why did the trials happen? One of the most common, there's a whole series of reasons of politics and really church politics, land disputes, arguments between various families that all went into it. Part of the problem that the entire colony of Massachusetts had at the time, in fact, was the charter under which the colony was originally formed had been revoked. So technically speaking, they didn't have a system of laws during the trials. They had submitted one but they needed the crown to approve it before they could actually enforce it. So they kind of shoehorned in the Salem witch trials through a back door in the laws they weren't that made them dubious to use and perform. But so there was also the tensions they were having with the Native Americans. There had been a war quite recent to the trial, relatively speaking, called King Philip's War between English settlers and the local Native American tribes in New England and with their French allies. That played a role. Religious intolerance did, in fact, play a role, because what I found out that I hadn't known before, which is rather interesting, is as much as people think of the Puritans coming to the U.S. for religious freedom, yeah, they wanted the freedom to practice their religion. They didn't want the freedom for even other types of Christians to practice theirs. Massachusetts was quite hard on other Christian denominations. For example, Puritans were driven out and even executed at times, simply for being, or not Puritans, not Pilgrims, Quakers. Although in point of fact, one of the first people to make accusations of witchcraft were a Quaker family. And one of the reasons that Burroughs got in trouble was that he was seen as having leanings in support of the Baptists. So there's a whole series of quite mundane, non-spiritual matters that go into the Salem witch trials. Thank you, Rev R. Sleeker. Did it come back on? It looks like it should have come back on. Okay. I appreciate you letting me know. Please give me a heads up if it happens again, at least while you're still here. And now the camera's cutting out. What in heaven's name is happening? So like I was saying, there's a whole series of political and sociological and religious issues that go into why the Salem witch trials happen. But the question that came to my mind is that all there is? Is there something spiritual that was happening as well? Particularly given some aspects of the accusations that were being made are consistent with poltergeist cases. And particularly, one of the big problems with the Salem trials was what they called spectral evidence. Was this idea that the person afflicted by a witch would see the witch come at them as a spirit and attack them. Further, it was believed that when the person was in a fit that was being caused by a witch, being touched by the witch would bring them out of it. But what's interesting about that is, well, it was taken very, very seriously by the courts, and people were hanged on the basis of this. I hesitate to call it evidence just because it really isn't. But even some of the Puritan ministers who were entirely in support of the trials opposed using this evidence, particularly a very interesting figure who I'm actually reading his book about the trials, which is Cotton Mather. Cotton Mather, for anyone who doesn't know, was a very prominent Puritan minister in Boston who was, he came out in favor of the trials. He was absolutely, yes, there are witches in Salem. They need to be hanged. But at the same time, Mather did not believe in spectral evidence because he believed that the devil could appear as an angel of light. So if Satan can appear as a holy angel, what stops him from looking like a living human? And there was a theological debate. And again, it's interesting because Mather was a supporter of the trials. He was a supporter in the existence of demons and witches and everything else. He wrote a book in defense of the trials called Wonders of the Invisible World. Although, interestingly enough, he wasn't a stupid man either. He was, in general, for anyone who doesn't know, Puritans put a lot more emphasis on education than you might think. Puritans were even the children were generally expected to read. Literacy rates were very high among boys, but they weren't actually that far behind in terms of female literacy rates as well, because the Puritans believed in the importance of everyone reading the Bible for themselves, not just being told what the Bible said. A number of important universities in the United States were started. Most notably, Harvard was started by Puritans. It was originally seminary. In fact, there's two interesting stories about Cotton Mather. One is that he was actually very much a supporter of inoculation, which was the 17th century version and 18th century version of vaccination. And yes, actually, for that matter, Cotton went to Harvard. But he was so outspoken about it that someone threw a grenade into his house with a note attached to it, yelling, "Inoculate yourself with this Mathers, you dog." Lucky for him, the grenade didn't go off. But things were that serious at the time. There's another story that's actually quite funny and has no bearing on the trials at all. But again, I felt like sharing it. Although the other person involved aside from Mather has a small relationship to the trials, which is that late in Mather's life, Benjamin Franklin came to visit him. And there was a bit of trepidation on Franklin's part because he was always a rebel. He was very critical of organized religion, particularly the Puritans. Although Franklin actually had respect for both Cotton and Increase, he'd actually traveled earlier in his life to go see the preachers speak. And he considered Mather's work on morality and very influential paper in his own thought processes growing up. But, they got together. They were actually having a fairly good time, and they went to Mather's library. And Franklin is preparing to leave, and Mathers goes, "Stoop, stoop!" And Franklin's a little confused, and promptly, on his way out, bangs his head against the low-hanging beam. At which point Mathers reminds him that you need to take a moment to pay attention to what's going on around you, or you're going to bang your head, essentially. Again, it doesn't... And the way that this relates even remotely to the Salem trials is that I want to say the mother of the family that made some of the first accusations was actually Franklin's aunt. But he was related to some of the people making accusation. One of the people that had made some of the first accusations. But getting back on track, there's two particular things I want to share. And while I wanted to try to do a slightly longer episode than this, I'm probably going to cut it short soon just because of all the technical glitches. But the things I wanted to share that I found very, very surprising is two stories that most of us who have read about the trials, read Arthur Miller's The Play of the Crucible, for example, or learned about them in high school, have heard that are apparently from the research I'm doing, particularly this book, Storm of Witchcraft, which is written by a University of Massachusetts professor who's dedicated a fair amount of time to the trials, but he busts them. One is the usual explanation of how everything started. So you may very well have heard the story, and again, it's in the play, of how Ann Putnam and her friend were looking into a glass full of eggs that the slave woman Tabuta had taught them. You could look into it, and then you would see glimpses of the future in the shape that the yolks formed. Specifically, it was supposed to tell you the job your future husband would have. The story goes on that one of the girls saw the shape of a cross and freaked out. And this is when the fits started. And when Reverend Paris, who was the father, or uncle at least, of one of the children, heard about it, he flipped out. And that's where the problems began. So here's what I find interesting. So the usual version of the story is that Tabuta was a practitioner of voodoo because she was a slave from Barbados, which is probably true, though she wasn't necessarily African American. She may have been from the Carib tribe, or from even one of the American tribes. Her husband, for example, was actually named John Indian and was a Native American, and also a slave. But all we know about Tabuta's origins is that Paris had been a plantation owner in Barbados and came back to the United States, and he brought Tabuta with him. Where she came from originally apparently is a bit of a debate. But the idea that she taught these girls how to do the egg yolk thing is not true. If you read the trial transcripts, and I actually bought a copy of the trial transcripts of basically all the surviving court documents. You can buy them on Amazon if you're interested. It's about $40. But they mention her doing all kinds of things, but they don't mention this fortune telling with the glass of eggs. That isn't to say the girls didn't do it, though, because while the record of her being involved comes about a century later, the records of the girls doing it were written right in the same time as the trials. But what I found out is that basically this type of scrying, this type of fortune telling, was a popular parlor game among Puritan children at the time. The Puritan religion absolutely hated it and condemned it as devil worship, but it was very popular in the Massachusetts Bay Colony. It sort of seems like it may very well have filled a similar role in Massachusetts that the Bloody Mary ritual fills in the modern day as a rite of passage for kids and a weird way of playing with the paranormal. That's not the most surprising thing I found out, though. So One of the most famous stories about the trials is the story of Giles Corey's death. Giles Corey was, by all accounts, a crotchety old man who, when he was accused of witchcraft, he refused to plead guilty or innocent. What he did is what apparently in English common law at the time, which is what the court was trying to follow, was called standing silent. And they laid him on the ground, laid a board across his chest, and started piling rocks onto the board. Every once in a while, they'd stop and say, guilty or innocent. And Giles' response was, more weight, until his chest caved in and he died of suffocation. Now, all this happened. But the usual version of why this happened is where this gets interesting. Usually, what I had been told growing up was that if you were charged with witchcraft and you pled guilty, the state seized your land. If you pled innocent, you were later found guilty and the state seized your land. So Corey supposedly refused to plead so that his sons would be able to inherit his farmlands. Oh, good heavens. And this apparently isn't true. One, there's apparently a great deal of gray area in the law at the time about whether or not land could be seized. Property could be seized, like jewelry and things of that nature. Land was iffier, and the sheriff of Salem at the time actually got in trouble for trying to seize some things. But aside from that, under English common law, someone who stood silent, like Corey did, who refused to plead, the property was still forfeit. As far as I know, his children did inherit the land, inherit things as they were supposed to, but what he did shouldn't have stopped that. That's what's so fascinating here, in my opinion. But anyway, this is a massive research project that I'm working on. These are just some interesting tidbits I ran into. And there's one other thing I want to get into before I sign out, which isn't related to Salem. But in the long term, I'm looking at probably writing my own book on the subject. And I'll talk about it more in videos. At the moment, I've got the Storm of Witchcraft book. I picked up the trial transcripts books. I've picked up Wonders of the Invisible World. I picked up Malleus Maleficarum, King James book on demonology, which I already had, but I lost my copy of, which is also very interesting in its own right, just in the way that James distinguishes between the magician, the necromancer, and the witch. Seeing magic as what was done, specifically as what was done by the Magi in the courts of Persia, whereas the difference between a witch and a necromancer in particular is that necromancers summon up demons and tell them what to do, which is worship demons, make bargains with demons, sell their soul to demons. Obviously, I'm not trying to disparage any modern people that consider themselves witches. I'm talking about how these things were seen in the time of King James I of England / King James VI of Scotland. But I find this distinction rather interesting. But it's a lot of research. It's going to be months, maybe longer, working on it. But it's going to be a lot of fun. The other thing I want to bring up, unfortunately in this instance, is, as many of you know from my last few videos, I have been working on a case of demonic activity in Delaware. I'd really like to be able to say that the case had resolved itself. Unfortunately, the ugly reality of the situation is that it has not. So please, I ask those of you who are of religious bent to pray for this woman in Delaware and for her family. The situation's been pretty ugly. I'm still trying to figure out what to do. I've tried a number of different solutions. Nothing seems to work in the long term. I really need to try and get clergy involved. If anyone happens to know clergy, preferably with some experience in the matter, but at this point I'll take anybody who's willing to work with the situation that is active in Delaware or near the Delaware, Maryland, Delaware, Pennsylvania, and New Jersey border. Please get a hold of me through my email in the comments. It's not a good situation. And I'm very worried about what's going to happen to this woman if some kind of resolution isn't found. Let's see, is there anything else to cover that I'm leaving out? Filled you in about the interesting things I found out about Salem. I filled you in on the case in Delaware. I filled you in on what's going on with the show. I'm probably going to wrap this up in a minute because the video continues to cut out. The audio is cut out at least once. If anybody has any questions or comments, please feel free to share them now. I would also like to add that my good friend and frequent guest, Virgo Triad, has returned to YouTube and has been making some videos. Apparently, for those of you who know who Virgo is, you probably know about her having some issues with a fire that happened. And yes, Rev, there has to be somebody. The problem is finding clergy that are knowledgeable and that you can cut through the red tape to get them to get involved, because churches are very leery about getting involved in the paranormal, is where it gets challenging. But in Virgo's case, things seem to be doing better. She is doing videos again. I would ask that you guys go over and check out her channel. If you're not familiar with her, I highly recommend her. She's a lot of fun and a very sweet lady. She doesn't talk about the paranormal. She talks about the very strange, wacky world of sovereign citizens, which is kind of paranormal in its own right, really. But she's been here a bunch of times. She's been a strong supporter of my show. And I'm very glad to see her back, and that things seem to be going better for her. Does anybody else have any questions? Or for that matter, I'm not picky. If you have a second question or comment, you're welcome to make it. Otherwise, I am going to be wrapping this up. We're at the half an hour mark, which isn't a terrible time to end it. My fiance is currently out of state with the newer laptop we got. I'm hoping that next week when I come back to do the show, I'll use the newer laptop, and maybe that'll work better than this one that's falling apart. For that matter, there's a plug that I could plug this in. That's a good point, Rev. Actually, I would be someone like that Ed Warren Japolo, not as experienced. But what Ed would have done in this kind of situation is get clergy involved. This kind of, I've done what lay people can do for the most part. Maybe somebody stronger in faith than myself could do more. I'm certainly not the be all and end all. But my strong feeling is at this point, she needs an experienced member of clergy who can act with the full weight of the church on the demonic activity that's taking place in her home. There's only so much lay people can do. The thing, there's the verses in the Bible about Jesus building his rock upon Peter, and again, the church built on the rock of Peter against the gates of hell. That the gates of hell will not stand, and bringing that weight against the demonic haunting is very powerful. But it also means working within the hierarchy of the church, being a bishop or someone ordained, with the authority of a bishop. I do actually know a bishop. I'm going to talk to her again, I think, about trying to get her involved in some manner. The main problem that we have is the cases in Delaware, and the bishop I know is in Chicago. There's a bit of a distance issue. And neither the client nor myself is in a position to fly somebody from Chicago to Delaware, unfortunately. But there's got to be some kind of... I haven't given up. Some things seem better, some things seem worse. There is a solution out there. There always is. It's just a question of figuring it out. Other than that, I do think I'm going to end it. I would have, like I said, I would like to have gotten longer, but at this rate, it wouldn't surprise me if the laptop explodes. Things are going so with the video and the audio being such a pain in the neck. I want to thank everyone for joining me. While people have been quiet, YouTube claims there are 3 people in chat. So that'd be Rev R. Sleeker and 2 other people I don't know who have been quiet, and that's okay. You don't have to share if you don't want to. But I want to thank everyone who's listening live. I want to thank everybody who comes back and listens later. If you're not, do me a great big favor, folks, or a couple great big favors. If you enjoy this and you like what I'm doing, and you haven't yet, please take the time to subscribe and hit that notification bell. If you have, or if you do so now, you also might consider doing me a solid and hitting like, maybe leaving a comment, sharing it with your friends. You are right. There are more clergy learning the right and how to be an exorcist than ever before, at least in the last couple hundred years, maybe further back. The problem is getting the Catholic Church involved requires getting psychiatric workups done, medical workups done, all of which is hard to do with someone who doesn't have medical insurance. And the church won't even entertain the idea of getting involved without that work being done first. I can't say I disapprove of wanting that work done, but as I've shown on the channel before, we have photographs of something very strange going on in this house. It should be enough to get a priest to come out and look at what's going on, even if they don't throw a whole exorcism at it. But it is what it is. But yeah, so like, comment, subscribe. Thank you to the person who gave me the like. I could see that on my wallet. If you happen to have a few dollars to spare, you might also consider going to my Patreon, which is also in the description. I work full time. The show is something I do in my spare time. I don't depend on donations or on ad revenue, although I'd love to be able to do that someday. So if you have some money and you can spare, feel free to do so. If you don't, that's cool too. You can do me a great deal of favor just by, again, subscribe, like, share it with your friends. Yeah, unfortunately, Revar Sleeker, this wouldn't happen in Europe. It's not great. No insurance, no exorcism. I don't know if there's a solution within the church, but it's the reality of you have to get medical workups done. If you can't get the medical workups done, it's a bit of a catch-22. But I'm trying to reach out to other investigators with more experience than I have. I mean, I've been doing this 20 years, but there are people who've been at this since before I was born, even with both Lou and Ed gone. We will find this woman a solution. I just don't know what it is yet. But by the grace of God, there will be. I reject the idea that hope is lost for her or anyone else that's under this kind of spiritual attack. In most cases, and if anyone listening isn't having some sort of spiritual problem, most cases resolve relatively quickly. Oftentimes, I make one visit to a house and I don't have to go back. So don't take this as if you have a problem, there's nothing that anybody can do about it. There is always hope and there's always help. You can reach out to me. My email is in the description. Well, it's not just true of me. I do not charge clients to help them with a case. The only money I will ever ask a client for is gas and tolls if I have to drive more than about 2 hours from where I live, because, like I said, I work a 9-to-5 job. I don't make that much money that I can drive all over the United States taking these kinds of cases. But even if, usually there's always a way I can help somebody. Even if somebody's too far for me to make the trip myself, I know of other groups and I can get them in touch with other people that will be closer and be able to help them out. But that is going to do it for tonight. My work schedule is about to change after this weekend to I have no idea what. So I can't. I can promise you there will be at least one show next week. I can't promise you what day it will be on, just because I don't know what I'm working yet. But that's it for tonight. I want to thank everybody for listening. Rev R. Sleeker, thank you for participating in the chat. But that's going to do it for tonight. This is Kevin Mears, the paranormal investigator, demonologist, and the Paranormal Encyclopedia, saying good night and God bless.